self-mastery requires that we are self-aware and that we're building that self-awareness. So aware of who we are at our core, the values that are really important to us, how they were formed, who we'd like to be as a leader. And so we need to stop and pause and reflect on all that and really do some self-observation, really dig in to deepen our awareness of all of those things. We have blind spots, all of us do. And so in order to really see those blind spots, it often requires that we do some self-observation and some self-reflection. Well, Kevin Cashman, in his book, Leadership from the Inside Out, he connects no pause with actually no leadership. And he says that if we have no pause, we have no reflection. If we have no reflection, we have no vision. And we know that vision is essential for good leadership. So no vision equals no leadership. Some other examples, Beethoven always talked about, his musical genius as not being about the actual notes, but being about the space between the notes. That's where the beauty came. That's where the actual genius came into his writing. This is a concept that we think illustrates that idea of space really creating the beauty. So a Japanese character, Yohaku, is the concept here. And the ink lines are beautiful, but what really creates the beauty and really makes this a work of art is the white space around. So again, we need the space, we need the white space. And we can think about that as where is the white space in our own lives and in our own leading. Wendy Palmer is a practitioner on the West Coast of conscious embodiment, and I had the privilege of working with her for a short time. And she talks about the importance of space around the objects and around the people, that's where the possibility comes in. That's where the new can actually show up. And new things can come in when there is that space around. So that's one idea and one way of thinking about the need for pause as a leader. I think another thing is we have 3 centers of knowing that we want to be tapping into at all times. The one that is constantly shouting at us all the time is our head. So our thoughts, just sometimes we can't even turn those off. So we don't have to listen so intently to our head and what that's telling us. But our hearts and also our bodies are constantly telling us things that we need to be listening to. So we need to pause to really hear that, to really listen to our hearts. And that's our feelings and emotions. And how are they informing maybe a decision or what to do in a certain situation? And then our bodies, we rarely really stop and pause and pay attention to what our bodies are telling us. But that's that intuition, that's that hit that we get sometimes. And we need to be quiet and really, listen to that and really feel that. Also, when we pause, we can start to understand when we've been thrown off center. As leaders, we're thrown off a lot. There can be a decision that comes down. There can be a new boss who has a whole different idea of what our role might be. There can be an interpersonal conflict. Many, many things happen in a day that can actually throw a leader off their centered, grounded place. So I think the pause allows us to check in with ourselves and just notice when we're not acting anymore out of our grounded self, when now we're starting to act out of our defenses, and be able to kind of regain center again by noticing that we are off center. Well, I think the only really important thing is that we have one, that we actually have a practice where the main purpose of that practice is to reflect and check in to those 3 centers of knowing. The pause practice, I think, needs to be something that's repetitive, it's regular, it's part of our lifestyle, it's planned in, it's something that we don't always put to the last on our to-do list for the day, something that's very intentional. Uh, this is a book that I really enjoy and use a lot in coaching, The Life That We Are Given by George Leonard and Michael Murphy. And they've got a lot of wonderful practices, some of which are pause practices in this book. But they talk about practice for practice sake, that there's some discipline there, that there is, some real benefit in just owning a practice that we do in a very intentional way. When we choose a pause practice, I think we have to accept that it will not be perfect, and it doesn't need to be. So there may be days we skip it, there may be days it doesn't go well. That doesn't matter. It's just that it's, a part of our lives to have that built in, that intentional pause and reflection. I think what we do want to notice, rather than all the times when it doesn't go perfectly, is what is it giving us? What are the benefits that we are really getting from that practice in terms of how it's helping us with our own self-awareness and our leadership? There are two people, Hunt and Devine, who are kind of coaching gurus, who wrote an article called The Power of Pause, and we'll share that with you. And they talk about, as we think about pause, to think about practices that create space in our lives. So that's that white space on the calendar, which most of us have very little of these days, I think. They also talk about the concept of pace, that thinking about how fast am I moving through life, and how quickly, physically even, am I really moving at work. And what does that do in terms of how I show up, how people approach me, how they see me, what my presence is like as a leader? So pace is another important part. And then they also really talk about thinking about what is a practice that allows us to be more present. And that has a lot to do with pausing and cutting out the distractions so that I can really be 100% in that place that I'm at, that I intend to be in that moment. Well, there are many types of pause practices. I think the first thing that comes to mind is meditation, and most of us go, oh no, please no. It's tough. A sitting meditation is usually the type of meditation that we talk about, and it's very difficult for beginners. It's definitely a practice that has to build and get better and better. But that's not the only kind of meditation. One that I really enjoy there are different examples of these, but walking meditations. You've seen labyrinths, either outside or even inside some conference centers or churches or something, and those are meant to be a place where you can do a walking meditation and really focus on the moment, on your breathing, on managing your thoughts and really connecting, if you're outside, connecting with nature. There's even eating meditations. I recently actually did one. It was about a 15-minute meditation on eating a tangerine. And if you think of a tangerine and all the different senses that are stimulated if you pay attention, and most of the time we never do that. So just really focusing on something intentionally and allowing it to trigger all of our senses can be another type of meditation. A lot of times people will say to me, well, I reflect on the way to work or on the way home. And yeah, that's when we tend to have a little sit time, but think about all the other things that are going on in our heads as we drive in rush hour traffic. We've got a judgment about that person that just cut us off, and we're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late, and how do I get into that lane, and oh my gosh, that guy almost hit me, and that's not very meditative. So let's try to, as we think of how we want to bring pause and reflection into our lives, try to think about something other than just our rush hour drive time, I think. Sometimes people use things like running or biking, and I believe that they can be very meditative and very reflective. As long as we're not bringing in the competition, we're not bringing in the, oh, I've got to beat my personal best, I've got to beat that person, that's when I think it becomes not such a good reflective process. But if it can just be getting in a rhythm and paying attention to our breathing and connecting with our environment in a really intentional way and just focusing on that repetitive movement, then it may work as that practice. One other thing that may come up in your coaching, you may be given a self-observation by your coach that you're working with. And that really is an intentional pause in the day. So let's say that you're working on trying to be a better listener, not interrupting people as much. That self-observation then actually asks you to pause and to stop and to look at yourself over a time period right before that, maybe a previous meeting or a previous interaction, and really think about, how did I do? What do I observe about myself? It's a great way to move ourselves, I think, toward an intentional improvement. And there are many of those. So you may be getting one of those intentional pauses in your coaching work that you do. There's one other one. I mentioned Wendy Palmer, the practitioner on the West Coast. She's got one that's really, I think, a great pause practice and a great recentering practice. It's a 4-step practice that we'll actually offer you in class, so you'll get a chance to try that on and see if there's either the whole or a part of that that actually is helpful to you in your reflection. So in the self-mastery model, we're going to invite you to really pause before and on that class day, and you will be really looking at yourself through a variety of lenses to really dig in and deepen that self-awareness. Before class, we will ask you to actually go to the online system, and there'll be a place there for you to record any current pause practice that you have. If you don't have one, that's fine. You can even talk about why you don't have one. Or if you have one, talk about what that does for you, any other comments that you have. So that's a way that we'll synthesize what you already have around reflection and be able to share that with classmates.